The voice over the loudspeakers boomed through the cavernous hall as the final syllables of my name echoed against polished walls and vaulted ceilings. And in that instant when hundreds of people surged into applause, I realized none of the cheers were meant for me at all. They were simply noise filling a space where love should have been. Because as I stood beneath the blinding stage lights with a square academic cap digging into my temples and a stiff paper folder shaking in my hands, all I could see around me were strangers collapsing into their families' arms, parents crying into shoulders, lovers pressing kisses into cheeks, children waving homemade posters in colors too bright for the solemnity of the moment. And everywhere I turned there were signs, balloons, whistles, voices calling out proud names. Yet for me there was only a hollow stillness as my own name rang again through the speakers, now foreign and heavy, the name I had rebuilt through exhaustion and sacrifice. The name I wore like armor after years of working brutal shifts, eating meals from cracked plastic containers at midnight, studying with burning eyes while the rest of the world slept. All of it done for the woman who once swore she would be in the front row screaming until her throat went raw, for the two children who once colored signs and taped them above their beds. And yet as I searched every row from front to back, left to right, I saw no familiar faces, no warmth, no recognition. Just the unbearable truth settling into my chest like cold iron, that not one person who mattered had chosen to be there. I forced myself forward when the dean reached out his hand, smiling for a camera I would never see, my lips curved into a shape that felt foreign, like wearing someone else's expression. And as I walked off the stage and into the narrow backstage hallway, the echo of applause faded into a dull roar that felt more like mockery than celebration. And when I finally looked down at my phone with trembling fingers, hopping against reason that there had been some mistake, some emergency delay, some simple explanation that would dissolve the knot in my stomach, I found only one unread message waiting for me, not congratulations, not pride, not love, but a blunt statement demanding an urgent conversation. And before I could even process the weight of those words, another message appeared beneath it, cold and surgical, confessing that the woman I built my life around was not in traffic, not in line for parking, not lost on the highway, but instead sitting in another man's home, my own blood. Someone I had trusted without hesitation, and that this betrayal had been unfolding for longer than I could measure, timed cruelly to arrive at the precise second my name was spoken aloud, leaving me standing in academic robes while my world collapsed in silence. And in that narrow corridor with peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights, I slid slowly to the floor, my back against the wall, my grip tightening around the phone as though it might disintegrate. Yet no tears came, no screams followed. Only a vast emptiness spreading through my chest, a quiet resolve sharpening in the dark. The night air cut through the thin fabric of my gown as I stepped outside into a scene that should have felt victorious. Graduates laughing, cameras flashing, parents embracing children beneath glowing street lamps. But I felt like a ghost drifting among the living, clutching proof of my accomplishment, while the people I did it for feasted elsewhere. And when I unlocked my phone again, hoping the words might vanish if I looked twice, they remained as sharp as the first moment, driving me toward a deeper truth I hadn't wanted to accept. So I opened a familiar social page and found smiling photographs arranged like a cruel collage, showing my partner flipping food at a backyard gathering, my children laughing on someone else's shoulders, my relatives raising glasses as though celebrating a life that no longer included me. And in the middle of the feed, a fleeting image appeared and vanished too quickly, but not before I captured it, revealing an intimacy that confirmed everything I feared. And in that instant, something inside me finally hardened, not with rage, but with a clarity so cold it felt like ice forming in my veins, because I understood then that pain could be transformed into purpose, and that silence could become strategy if wielded correctly. When I returned to the empty house, the quiet felt unnatural, like walking through a museum dedicated to someone else's life, each room filled with reminders of effort poured into a vision that no longer existed, walls painted with care, furniture assembled late at night. kitchen upgrades paid for with overtime checks, and I realized that what I saw as shared dreams had always been my sacrifices alone. So I sat at the counter, opened my computer, and accessed the systems I had quietly maintained for years, layers of financial structure built not from distrust, but from a deep understanding that security was survival. And as I reviewed documents, accounts, and safeguards designed long before this moment, I felt something close to relief, knowing that beneath the surface of loss there was still control, still a foundation they never knew existed, still a plan waiting patiently for the moment it would be needed. Days passed without answers, apologies, or accountability, messages arriving that attempted to soften betrayal with excuses and blame, calls from voices that no longer had the right to speak to me, and I archived them all, not because I was finished, but because I was preparing, because while they played house in stolen comfort, I was mapping consequences with precision, stepping into a quiet library to create identities that left no trace, gathering evidence from overlooked devices, assembling timelines of deceit and misuse, and crafting a message that would unravel more than a relationship, sending it into the corridors of power where it would ignite quietly before exploding into chaos. And when I closed the laptop and walked back into the daylight, I felt no fear, only a steady certainty that the truth, once released, would do all the damage I could never accomplish alone. The results unfolded like a domino effect, one revelation triggering another, job titles dissolving into uncertainty, social profiles disappearing, carefully built reputations eroding overnight. And while the world whispered rumors and speculated, I moved silently through the aftermath, finalizing documents with legal precision, securing what was rightfully mine, protecting the children's future, and redefining the boundaries of my life, knowing that every signature, every clause, every safeguard represented not vengeance, but restoration of balance. And when the woman who once claimed my heart stood at my door pleading for forgiveness, I spoke with a calm she did not recognize, explaining that choices have weight and consequences, and that the life she abandoned was no longer available to reclaim. As institutions processed the fallout and authorities reviewed records, the man who betrayed both blood and trust faced scrutiny that followed him everywhere. And I watched from a distance, not with satisfaction, but with acceptance, because justice does not require celebration, only resolution. And as my own legal journey concluded swiftly, I focused on rebuilding what mattered most, creating stability, offering consistency, and allowing time to reveal truths my children would eventually understand. Welcoming them with patience rather than bitterness when they returned, not to punish their mother, but to show them that love is proven through presence, not promises, and that resilience is built one quiet day at a time. Months later, when my story surfaced unexpectedly through a single image shared by a stranger, it resonated with people who had endured their own silent battles, and I found myself standing before crowds not as a victim, but as a reminder that perseverance can survive even the deepest betrayal, that dignity can be reclaimed, and that power often lies in restraint. And as I walked once again through the same auditorium, now under different circumstances, I felt no anger toward the past, only gratitude for the strength it revealed, because the person I became through loss was stronger than the one who entered it with hope alone. Standing at the edge of the stage, I realized that while applause fades and relationships can fracture, integrity endures, and the journey that began in isolation ended in purpose, not because I sought revenge, but because I chose to rebuild rather than remain broken, understanding finally that quiet does not mean weak, and that patience, when paired with resolve, can reshape a life completely. The months that followed unfolded with a strange stillness, as if the world itself had taken a breath after the storm, and in that calm, I began to understand the shape of my new life, one built not on reaction but intention, where every morning started with the quiet ritual of making breakfast for two sleepy children who slowly learned that laughter could exist again without fear, and every evening ended with stories, warm light, and the soft hum of safety returning to a home that had once echoed with betrayal. And although the wounds of the past lingered beneath the surface like faint scars, they no longer dictated my movements, because I had learned that strength does not announce itself with noise. It reveals itself through consistency, through showing up day after day, even when the memory of loss still flickers behind your eyes. And as neighbors, colleagues, and strangers slowly recognized me, not as the man who was abandoned, but as the one who endured and rebuilt, I allowed myself to release the weight of what I could not change, replacing it with gratitude for what had been reclaimed. The children began to grow into themselves again, their laughter no longer guarded, their questions honest and searching. And when they asked why things changed, I told them the truth in gentle layers, not with bitterness but with clarity, explaining that sometimes people make choices that fracture trust, yet those fractures do not define who we become. And as they listened, I saw resilience reflected in their eyes, the same quiet fire that had carried me through years of exhaustion and disappointment. And I understood then that the greatest victory was not in the downfall of others, but in the healing of those who were innocent. Because when they smiled again without fear, I felt the past loosen its grip, allowing the future to unfold with a softness I had almost forgotten was possible. I returned to my career with a renewed sense of purpose, channeling the discipline and strategy that once protected me into building opportunities for others, creating programs that supported those who had been overlooked, underestimated, or left behind. And as word spread, doors opened, not because I demanded recognition, but because authenticity speaks louder than desperation, and in boardrooms, community centers, and late-night planning sessions, I saw reflections of my own journey mirrored in people who were searching for hope, and with each conversation, I felt the story expand beyond me, transforming into something collective, something that reminded me that pain shared becomes lighter, and purpose multiplied becomes unstoppable. There were moments when the past resurfaced unexpectedly, a familiar song, a scent, a memory triggered by the smallest detail, and though my chest tightened briefly, I no longer resisted those waves, because I had learned that healing does not mean forgetting. It means integrating, allowing the past to inform but not imprison. And in those moments of reflection, I thanked the version of myself who endured the darkest nights, who kept moving when every reason to stop seemed justified, and who chose growth over bitterness, knowing that resilience is not built in comfort but forged in adversity, shaping a future that feels earned rather than accidental. As invitations to speak and share continued to arrive, I remained grounded, choosing carefully where to invest my energy, prioritizing authenticity over applause, and when I stood before audiences, I spoke not of revenge, but of transformation, of choosing patience over impulse, of reclaiming dignity through boundaries, and of understanding that true power lies in the ability to walk away from chaos without becoming it. And as people nodded in recognition, I realized that my story was no longer mine alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt invisible, who had given without receiving, who had wondered if their efforts mattered. And in that shared understanding, I felt connected to something larger than any single experience. Time continued its gentle march forward, seasons changing, routines evolving, and with each passing day, the echoes of betrayal softened, replaced by moments of joy, quiet laughter, and the steady rhythm of a life rebuilt with intention. And when I looked around my home, now filled with warmth and presence, I saw not a reminder of loss, but a testament to endurance, to the idea that even the most shattered foundations can be reconstructed stronger than before. And in that realization, I found peace not in closure, but in continuation, moving forward with clarity rather than fear. Occasionally, whispers of the past reach me through distant acquaintances or fleeting headlines, but they no longer stirred emotion, because I had learned that holding onto resentment only prolongs pain, and by releasing it, I reclaimed my freedom, choosing instead to focus on growth, connection, and the quiet satisfaction of living authentically. And as the world moved on, I did too, not in denial, but in acceptance. Embracing the present with open hands rather than clenched fists, knowing that the future is shaped not by what was taken, but by what we choose to create. One evening, as I watched the sunset with my children, the sky painted in colors that felt symbolic of new beginnings, I realized how far we had come, not measured in milestones or achievements, but in the simple moments of peace that now filled our days. And in that stillness, I felt gratitude not for the pain itself, but for the strength it revealed, for the perspective it granted, and for the opportunity to rebuild a life rooted in honesty, resilience, and purpose. Knowing that, while the journey was not what I had planned, it was exactly what I needed to become who I was meant to be. In quiet reflection, I understood that survival is not the end of the story, growth is, and that every challenge carries within it the seeds of transformation, waiting patiently for the moment we choose to nurture them. And as I continued forward, guided by clarity rather than fear, I embraced the truth that my worth was never defined by abandonment, but by the courage to rise, to rebuild, and to love again, fully and without reservation, trusting that even in the face of loss, life has a way of offering something new if we remain open to it. And so, as the chapters of my life continued to unfold, I carried with me the knowledge that strength often whispers rather than shouts, that patience is a form of power, and that even in the deepest silence, there is the potential for renewal, because from the ashes of what was lost, I discovered not just survival, but a deeper understanding of purpose, connection, and the quiet beauty of starting again, knowing that the journey forward is not about erasing the past, but honoring it as the foundation upon which a stronger, wiser, and more compassionate life is built.